Thank you so much. It's a real honor to be here with you today. And having watched also Father Michael Kelly with his video, what a legend. So it's a real honor to be here, and even if it's just to speak for him, really, I'm really delighted to be able to do so. So as mentioned, I work with the global network of people living with HIV. So there is a global network of people living with HIV, and I live in South Africa. And our vision at the global network is that all people living with HIV enjoy a good quality of life. And part of enjoying a good quality of life is about fully enjoying your sexual and reproductive health and rights fully. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to share 3 stories of young women who are living with HIV. And all are really strong and really intelligent and gorgeous and super creative. And they're young women who really inspire me. And I have their special permission to share their stories and their journeys. And what I'm hoping is that these stories will illustrate why it's important to work on SRHR and HIV together, and why it's important to invest in this area of work. So this here is Lebo. So Lebo is South African, and Lebo lives in Johannesburg. And when she was 13 years old, like lots of other girls her age, Lebo started having sex with other boys of her age, 13. So still a teenager, she then started meeting up with older men. And she would flirt with older men, and then she started having sex with them in exchange for stuff. So for a mobile phone, for some data, which here I heard is called credit, just for some money. And these older men in South Africa, we call them blessers. It's a horrible name. So they used to be called sugar daddies, but they're called blessers. And unfortunately, it's not seen as a really bad thing. It's been kind of coolified. And so basically, Lebo had a number of blessers, and she would basically have sex with them, and they would give her stuff. Now, in South Africa, there are lots of different settings where you can get HIV testing, and especially around World AIDS Day, they pop up everywhere. So Lebo and her boyfriend at the time, they went for an HIV test, and she didn't really think much of it, but then she found out that she was actually HIV positive. A month later, she also found out that she was pregnant. And the combination of finding out she was HIV positive and finding out that she was pregnant, that was really too much for her. So she tried to commit suicide, to kill herself. And she really struggled in life, and for 2 years she was in total denial that she was HIV positive and took a test several times, hoping each time that the result would be different. So her biggest issue was she was really worried about how other people would react when they found out that she was HIV positive. So her biggest fear was basically the issue of stigma. So this is beautiful Lebo with the help of her family and also with the help of some community-based organizations. Lebo is living openly with HIV. She's speaking up at schools. She's talking about using condoms to prevent pregnancy, to prevent getting STIs, and to prevent getting HIV. And she's speaking up, basically, about HIV. And that's quite a difficult thing, because in South Africa, even though 7.7 million people live with HIV, which today I learned is nearly double the population of Ireland, that blew my mind. So imagine nearly double the population of Ireland is living with HIV, and nobody wants to talk about it. And the reality is that we don't talk to our parents about it. We don't talk to anybody about it. And today I visited a school this morning, and they were 15 and 16 years old, and they came up to me and they said, "Oh, we don't talk about it either with our parents." One of them said that their parents tried, but it was like really majorly awkward, and so they were glad that it stopped. But the point is that, even though it's a country with lots of HIV, it doesn't necessarily mean that we talk about it, and that's what Lebo is doing. So meet Nadia. This is Nadia, and Nadia is from Burundi and lives in Bujumbura, which is the capital city of Burundi. It's a really cool name, Bujumbura. And Nadia, unlike Lebo, Nadia was born with HIV. And when Nadia used to go and get her medication, when she interacted with healthcare providers as a teenager, they told her, you should never, ever have sex, ever, 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 because you are HIV positive. You will infect whoever you have sex with, and you should never have a baby because the baby will be infected, and the baby will die, and you will die. So basically, you should just never, ever have sex. At the same time, another experience Nadia shared is that, she's a really beautiful girl. And when she used to go to the health center, you see lots of different doctors, and that there were a couple that were often hitting on her and flirting with her. And one of them just couldn't believe that she was HIV positive, so even did an extra test to check. Now, this raises lots of different issues about healthcare providers, right? In terms of their respect for clients, but also in terms of information and knowledge around HIV. So Nadia grew up feeling relatively cursed and feeling really bad about herself, about the fact that she was HIV positive. And reflecting back, she talks about the self-stigma that she experienced. She felt really bad about herself, and she felt that she would never, ever be able to live a full life. And today, Nadia is married, and she works, she's a finance officer for an organization, a youth center in Burundi. And she said that she wanted me to share that when the big lesson that she's learned in life is that life continues and that you can do life. So the next story is the story of Dottie. So Dottie is Kenyan, and she lives in Nairobi. Now, Dottie wasn't born with HIV, and she didn't just do transactional sex. Dottie left home when she was 12 years old, and she lived on the streets. And Dottie soon learned that she could sell sex for cash, and so that's what she did. And she was streetwise, and she had a number of long-term clients who took really good care of her. So Dottie actually grew up from the age of 12 selling sex, and at the age of 16, she identified as a sex worker. Now, Dottie didn't know about condoms, and she never used condoms between the age of 12 and the age of 20. For 8 years, she was just having sex. And at the age of 20, she fell pregnant. And then when she went to the hospital and she was accessing antenatal care, that's where she found out that she was HIV positive. So today, Dottie is working with projects with other sex workers, many of whom are living with HIV. And she speaks openly about condom use. She speaks openly about pre-exposure prophylaxis, PrEP. She speaks about contraceptives, and she speaks up about reproductive rights, including the right to have safe abortion services. So HIV affects women, and we've heard a lot of stats. And in fact, the statistic that Father Michael shared, the way he framed it, that there's a new infection every 3 minutes, I think that pretty much says it all. But what is actually going on here? What is it that's actually going on here with women? It's ultimately an issue of power. This is all about power, and it's about the power dynamics between women and men. Women have less power in society, less power at home, less power in relationships, less power at work, less power in places of worship, and less power in decision-making spaces. So I stand before you. I look pretty confident, right? I hope. Am I looking confident? Yeah, I'm looking confident. Massively confident. Great. I look pretty confident. But the reality is that there's sometimes in my life when actually the issues of power play out. And this might apply to many of you in the room. So I'm married to a Zambian, where Father Kelly basically is right now. I'm married to a Zambian. And when we visit Zambia from South Africa, I spend lots of time in the kitchen. And I spend lots of time, guys, chopping green vegetables and cutting onions and over and over and over again and feeding what feels like millions of people but really isn't. And I wear a chitenge, which is a cloth. And honestly, I sometimes think, why was I wearing the chitenge? And it's because that's what the other women were doing. So on top of my jeans, I wear a chitenge, and I spend a lot of time in the kitchen. Now, what happens is the men eat first. We serve the men first, and then we serve the children. I know, it's awful. I'm just explaining how this works, you know? Then we serve the children, and then the rest of us eat. And we don't even organize it as well as we've organized it for the men and for the children. And when I am speaking to my husband or to his brothers or to his uncles, I'm quite careful about the language that I'm using. I'm quite careful about it, about what it is that I'm saying, just because of just the environment that I'm in. And this power dynamic is perpetuated not by men, but pretty much by everybody around, including women, in terms of what is right, Georgina. Georgina, what is right and what is wrong? Now, I sometimes, even in that moment, I think, oh my gosh, if the young women I work with, who I encourage to be bold and empowered and to speak up, if they could see me now, the shame of it. And yet I find myself in that same situation every single time I visit. So just in terms of understanding the issue of power dynamics and gender, I think that's just to explain it, because we need to find a way to shift these dynamics. We can shift these dynamics, and we have to find a way to shift these dynamics that put women in positions where they have no say, where they feel they must comply with certain cultural practices, where they're unable to access any services or to negotiate condom use, and where they experience gender-based violence. So I've shared some difficult and complex kind of situations, but in the case of Lebo and in the case of Nadia and in the case of Doti, they're also part of the solutions that we're looking for. Lebo is fighting for young women to take charge of their own health and to know about different contraceptive options and to know about HIV. This is a national campaign in South Africa, and that's Lebo. And, it says HIV negative or positive, I'm the same person. So it's really looking to address stigma. Nadia is working in a youth center that's delivering integrated services to all young people living with HIV, unmarried, selling sex, using drugs, identifying as lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. And Joannie mentioned this. Integrated services are very important, and we can't take that for granted. It's important that we're able to provide one-stop shops for people where they can go and access services, and it just makes sense. It's good for clients, it's good for quality of care, and it's just more efficient. So we need integrated services where young women can access the services, but also without fear of judgment. Now, we have a range of different HIV prevention options and contraceptive options, and also STI diagnostics and treatment. But the reality is that we need more, and we particularly need more women-controlled products. We need more tools that women can use. At the moment, the one female-controlled product we have is the female condom, and that still requires negotiation. You cannot have sex with somebody and be like, secretly put on a female condom, So it requires basically negotiation. So we need more prevention technologies that are women-controlled, and we need multi-purpose technologies that can work to prevent HIV and also prevent contraception. And this is Doti. Doti has used a lot of her skills that she's learned leading the African Sex Worker Alliance to be able to help other people. And the message from Doti is around connecting with the health and the employment and the education sectors, because we want young women to thrive. And that means being able to get a job and being able to have resources so that they have power. The one thing Doti shared when I asked her, Doti, where did you get your strength? Where did your strength come from to be able to be so resilient? And she shared that her strength came from her faith and from God and her belief in God. And I thought this was really important to share because Nadia mentioned that as well, and so did Lebo. And it's important to note that often we talk about religion as quite a repressive thing, don't we? We say, oh, it's the church, right? We talk about it as a repressive thing. But for many, their church community or their spirituality more generally can be a great source of strength, particularly when it comes to their mental well-being. And finally, the power to demand, we need an active civil society that's kind of speaking up. You mentioned that, the World AIDS Day theme is communities at the center and communities leading. So that requires an investment, but we need communities because communities are the ones that raise a lot of the difficult issues. So my final message is that I would really like to thank the Irish government for all of your support for sexual and reproductive health and rights, and especially for the second R, for the rights aspect. We live in a time of real conservatism. We are facing a lot of conservative attitudes all across the region, all across sub-Saharan Africa. And every time we think that we've made progress, it feels like we're honestly taking more steps back. And as an example, the US government has a program called PEPFAR, and they have a policy called the Mexico policy, which some of us call the global gag rule. And basically, it restricts the use of US funding if an organization is delivering safe abortion services. So you can't get money from the US government, the biggest donor, if you are delivering safe abortion services. But we cannot respond to the full sexual and reproductive health and rights of young women and girls if we pick and choose what we are comfortable with based on our own moral judgments of what is right or wrong. Ultimately, girls need to decide for themselves. Young women need to decide for themselves. So I really thank the Irish government. I thank you all as the taxpayers for really being a brave funder and supporter that's actually responding to the realities of women and girls, and especially those who are most marginalized. And our call as GMP Plus to you is to keep HIV, SRHR, and women on your agenda. It looks like that's not going to be too hard because it looks like it's quite firmly on your agenda. But do keep it on your agenda, and it's really important to keep it on your agenda domestically as well as internationally, because there's no point in you talking about it elsewhere if it's not happening here as well. Also, to make sure that your programs are really pushing for integration of SRHR and HIV, and for those most marginalized. So you talked about, those furthest, the last mile first. So those are young women who are unmarried. It's young HIV-positive women. It's women who are selling sex, it's women who are using drugs, it's transgender women. These are those who are furthest behind. So that's where you need to prioritize. And the third call to you is to really invest in community-based organizations and community-led organizations, whether it's via your embassies, whether it's via innovative funding mechanisms like the Robert Carr Fund. It's really important that you're able to fund those things that are non-clinical, those things that shift, that really push to shift social and gender norms. And a lot of that work is done by communities. So I'd like to thank you again for the opportunity to be with you, and thank you for listening to me, and just again, thank you for all of your support for sexual and reproductive health and rights.